Diner Rossini says the 49ers only were willing to trade Brandon Aiyuk if they could get a top-flight wide receiver to replace him. They offered a third-round pick to Denver for Courtland Sutton and then would have dealt Aiyuk to the Steelers, but then the Broncos declined the offer, so Aiyuk stays in San Francisco. What do you think? And how attractive would that have been to take some picks from Pittsburgh, throw a third to Denver? Now you've got Courtland Sutton and maybe a little bit more draft capital, but you don't have Brandon Aiyuk. How would the Niners be a different football team if they had consummated that trade?
They'd be worse, not terribly worse. I don't think their Vegas over-under would change much at all. They'd go from 11.5. They'd probably change the juice on it, but I think it would stay at 11.5. Courtland Sutton's a fine player. There's nothing wrong with Courtland Sutton. He can absolutely play X receiver. He's not nearly on the caliber of a Brandon Aiyuk, but if that's your best option, you can ride with that. And if the 49ers were going to have, if they were going to have Aiyuk play on the fifth-year option and they didn't want to deal with the drama and the nonsense and the possibility, as you alluded to, of losing the locker room and all that, then that's a pretty good contingency plan, all things considered. But it also, as evidenced, is a pretty complex one that was never really likely to materialize. I mean, the better option, and one that we've speculated about, and it was just speculation, would be get Davante Adams out of Las Vegas. Now you can make the argument, hey, we got a player of the same caliber. I don't know if it would have been a third-round pick, but maybe a second, something like that. Maybe an amalgamation of picks. I love using that word, Larry. Yes. And now you have a player who you can make an argument that Adams is a better receiver than Aiyuk. I wouldn't at this point in his career, but who the hell knows? I mean, he's had Jimmy G throwing him the ball. Didn't work out all that great for Brandon Aiyuk when Jimmy G was throwing him the ball. I mean, Davante Adams can't even fix the guy. So it would have been a fine contingency plan, but it doesn't surprise me. None of this sounds to me, or none of it, I don't get the scent off of any of it, that this is something that was actually in the works. This was an idea that they asked about. They got shot down, and now they're saying, hey, we could have done this. I mean, there was a lot of damage control that was being done through helpful media today. And I think that only shows how far the 49ers rolled over, given into Brandon Aiyuk, that they're trying to convince everybody that, in fact, they did not get owned. Please don't put in the newspaper that we got owned. In fact, we had so many plans, but this was always what we wanted to do. And it just rings hollow. It just rings untrue. And it's all kind of phony baloney to me.
Well, to me, I mean, it's like once you invested a first-round draft choice in a receiver, you were hoping that receiver would show up and be awesome and basically, give you more leverage. And instead, that receiver showed up, flashed some talent, flashed some ability, but then was hurt all summer and wore the blue jersey and actually gave, Aiyuk a sizable amount of leverage.
Yeah,
because of how hurt and how frequently he was hurt.
No doubt.
So I mean, I'm not surprised that it got done really quick after this last thing where they basically said, hey, look, you're either going to play or you better play, because it's like the cards were done being played. I mean, there was no more moves. He was going to ultimately lose. And so, he somewhat caved, but then they also caved because they gave him the $30 million. Now, the question is this a good move for them short-term or long-term? To me, the fifth-year option seemed like the perfect, let him play on the fifth-year option, evaluate Pearsall, evaluate Cowing, see what kind of year Deebo has, and see who's healthy. And if Aiyuk outplays Deebo, then maybe Aiyuk stays. If you look at Cowing and Pearsall at the end of the year and you think one guy's Jerry Rice and the other guy's Randy Moss, then you get rid of Deebo and Aiyuk, and you've got,
least for keeping expectations low.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just saying, it's like next year, the Niners are going to be in a much better position to evaluate.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to keep Deebo long term or Aiyuk? Do you want to have, what's the Cowing factor? What's the Pearsall factor? What do the rest of the weapons look like? Who does Brock Purdy seem to favor? Who does he have the best rapport with? I mean, a year from now, I think would be a much better time for the 49ers to decide on their long-term, issues or questions with the wide receivers. And instead, now it kind of sets up for, this is probably Deebo Samuel's final year in a Niner uniform, no matter what.
That's right. And I think that was their plan all along, as evidenced by the fact that they were shopping Deebo around to everybody. I mean, Mike Silver coming out today and saying that there's a chance that Deebo gets traded if things go awry this season, mid-season. So clearly that is the plan now. I don't think that's a bad plan. It's always been the original plan. But to lean into your point here, Deebo still has another year on the contract. Deebo has a contract for the 2025 season. Now, there's no guaranteed money on it, and it's actually a lesser cap number than this season. So they wouldn't even have to make a decision on Deebo Samuel long term. They probably would want to. They'd want to get in another year, a bumper year, something to that effect, give themselves a little bit of wiggle room so that they're not up against something serious, possibly losing them for nothing at the end of the year. But at 28 years old, with the way that he plays football, it's just pretty unlikely to me that the 49ers are ever going to invest big money, which is what would be necessary given his track record as an elite player in this league, that they were ever going to invest big money in Deebo Samuel again. So that's why Aiyuk makes sense. And I think after last year, it's undeniable that Brandon Aiyuk is Brock Purdy's favorite target. So I think that's a big reason as to why the 49ers were, one, willing to pay him anything going into this season, that they even entertained the notion of a contract extension, and why they gave him $7-8 million more than they originally planned. They don't want to find out what Brock Purdy looks like without his favorite target out there. And it's a lot easier to replace a Z receiver in a Kyle Shanahan system than it is to replace an X, as evidenced by this offseason where we don't know what they have at X other than Brandon Aiyuk. You can put together some Jawan Jennings and some Cowing and some Pearsall and, here's some Chris Conley for a couple snaps. That's not Super Bowl contention worthy. And the X receiver spot in Kyle Shanahan's offense, as it is at least ideologically structured, is the focal point of the passing game. It's like that for most teams. A lot of teams now have moved that to the slot. You've seen that with the Cowboys. You've seen that with the Lions. But for Kyle Shanahan, who still uses tight splits, who still goes in two wide receiver sets on the majority of downs, the X receiver is everything to him. And yes, they do get the ball to Deebo, and certainly Christian McCaffrey is the number one option in the offense. They want to get the ball to him as often as possible. But functionally, as the play is drawn up, the first read is time and time again X receiver. And I don't think, given the amount of work that they had to put in with Brandon Aiyuk, given the development that he has shown over his career to reach the point now where we're even having a conversation about him making more than $25 million a year, much less the 30 he's going to make moving forward. I don't think they were terribly interested in going through that process again, because it's just such a difficult position. Does that justify what they did? I mean, it's been done, so who the hell cares if it's justified or not? But Deebo Samuel is a much easier player to move off of, given what's coming down the pipeline for the 49ers fiscally, given that his entire game is here for a good time, not for a long time.